Listen carefully, because what I'm about to say might change how you see everything. There is a very specific moment when someone who has spent their entire life avoiding emotional dependency quietly decides that you are different. They won't announce it. They won't post about it. They won't even say it out loud at first. But inside them, something shifts. And if you're with someone who struggles with avoidance, you already know how rare that shift is. You know how guarded they are. You know how careful they are with vulnerability. You know how quickly they retreat when things start to feel intense. So when an avoidant decides you're the one, it's not fireworks, it's not dramatic confessions, it's not a sudden personality change. It's a slow internal surrender that happens in silence. Avoidants don't fall in love loudly, they fall in love privately. And the reason is simple. For them, love has always been tied to risk. Risk of losing independence, risk of being engulfed, risk of being disappointed, risk of being seen too clearly. Somewhere in their early emotional blueprint, closeness became associated with pressure instead of safety. So they learned to cope by staying slightly detached, slightly unavailable, slightly out of reach. That distance isn't because they don't care, it's because caring feels dangerous. And here's what most people misunderstand. Avoidants rarely believe in the idea of the one, not because they are cynical, but because believing in one person means giving that person power, and power over their emotional world is the very thing they have spent years trying to protect. So when they meet someone, they don't think, is this my forever? They think, can I keep my space? They think, will this person expect too much? They think, will I lose myself here? Their first instinct is preservation, not surrender. This is why you may have felt like you were always slightly outside their inner world, like you were close, but never fully inside, like they cared, but not in the way you expected, and maybe you tried harder, maybe you explained more, maybe you reassured them, maybe you overgave, but the truth is, the harder you chase an avoidant, the more their nervous system interprets that as threat, not because your love is wrong, but because intensity feels like pressure to them, and pressure activates their defense. So when does everything change? When does an avoidant look at someone and internally decide, this is the one I don't want to lose? It happens when four very specific things occur, and the first one is the most misunderstood. The first requirement is that you stop chasing. This sounds counterintuitive. It feels almost unfair. You think, if I care, shouldn't I show it? And yes, healthy love involves showing care. But chasing and showing care are not the same thing. Chasing is rooted in anxiety. It's over-explaining. It's over-texting. It's constantly checking for reassurance. It's trying to close every emotional gap immediately. And for someone with avoidant tendencies, that kind of energy feels overwhelming. It feels like their autonomy is being pulled away. When you stop chasing, something powerful happens. The dynamic shifts. For the first time, they are not reacting to your pursuit. They are sitting with their own feelings, and that space forces clarity. Because as long as you are chasing, they can stay in a comfortable position of emotional distance. They can let you carry the weight of momentum. But when you pull back, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect, they feel the absence. And avoidants don't process emotions in the moment. They process them in the space after, when things go quiet, when there's distance, when they have room to think. That's when they start asking themselves questions they were avoiding. Why do I miss them? Why does this feel different? Why does the idea of them moving on bother me? The silence becomes louder than the noise ever was. This is the moment when fear of losing you becomes real. As long as they believe you will always be there, always accommodating, always understanding, no matter how distant they become, there is no urgency, there is no emotional reckoning. But when they sense that you are no longer overextending yourself, when they see that you are capable of walking away peacefully, something shifts inside them. Scarcity creates clarity, not because they are playing games, but because their emotional system wakes up when security is no longer guaranteed. And here's the part that's difficult to accept. You cannot force this realization. You cannot convince them that you are the one. They have to feel it. They have to come to it on their own. Avoidants value what feels self-chosen. If they feel cornered into commitment, they resist. If they feel free to choose, they lean in. So when you stop chasing, you give them the freedom to step forward voluntarily, and that voluntary movement is everything. Now let's go deeper into what's happening inside them during this shift. When you pull back, at first they might act unfazed. They may seem calm, even relieved, but internally, curiosity begins to replace certainty. They were certain you would always be there. Now they're not sure. That uncertainty activates their attachment system in a way that pursuit never could. They start noticing your absence. They replay conversations. They think about your laugh, your consistency, the way you understood them without demanding too much. And slowly what they took for granted becomes something they don't want to lose. But this only leads to the next requirement. If something else is true, you must feel safe to them, not demanding, not emotionally explosive, not unpredictable, safe. Avoidants grew up associating closeness with overwhelm, so they are hyper-attuned to emotional intensity. If your love feels like pressure, they pull away. If it feels like calm presence, they soften. This doesn't mean you suppress your needs, it means you regulate them. There is a difference between expressing feelings and flooding someone with them. The avoidant nervous system responds best to steadiness. Think about the difference between standing near a quiet lake versus standing near crashing waves. Both are water, both are powerful, but one invites you in slowly, the other demands immediate attention. Avoidants move toward calm energy because calm feels controllable, and control equals safety to them. When they associate you with nervous system peace, that is when something profound begins to happen. They start to feel what secure attachment feels like, even if they don't have language for it. They begin to experience closeness without suffocation, conversation without interrogation, presence without pressure. And that combination is rare for them. Most of their past experiences have reinforced the idea that closeness equals losing themselves. So when they meet someone who allows them space while still being emotionally available, it disrupts their old narrative. This is why trying to fix them doesn't work. Trying to save them doesn't work. Trying to analyze them into vulnerability doesn't work. The third subtle layer inside this first phase is acceptance. When they feel that you are not trying to change them, they feel less defensive. Avoidants carry a quiet shame about their emotional patterns. They know they pull away. They know they struggle with intimacy, and being constantly reminded of that only deepens their walls. But being accepted, truly accepted, lowers them. Now imagine what that feels like from their perspective. For the first time, they are with someone who isn't demanding constant proof of love. Someone who isn't punishing them for needing space. Someone who doesn't escalate every moment of distance into a crisis. That stability feels foreign. And because it feels foreign, it also feels valuable. So when you stop chasing, when you become steady instead of reactive, when your presence feels peaceful instead of pressuring, the first domino falls. They begin to see you not as a threat to their independence, but as an addition to their life. And that distinction changes everything. This is the early stage of when an avoidant decides you're the one. It doesn't look like grand gestures. It looks like subtle shifts, a slightly faster response time, a little more consistency, a question about your future plans, a moment of unexpected vulnerability. These are not accidents. They are experiments. They are testing what it feels like to lean in without losing themselves. And if you are patient, if you maintain your self-respect, if you don't revert back to chasing the moment they soften, you allow the process to deepen. Because the truth is, avoidants don't choose someone because they were pursued relentlessly. They choose someone because they felt safe enough to step forward freely. You may have thought that being the one required proving your worth. It doesn't. It requires being anchored in it. You may have thought that loving harder would secure them. It won't. Loving calmly might. And this is not about playing psychological games. It's about emotional maturity. It's about understanding that some hearts open quietly, not loudly. So if you're in this space right now, if you've stopped chasing and you're wondering whether they even notice, they do. They notice more than they show. They just process it slowly. And in that slow processing, they are deciding whether you are the person they can finally let their guard down with. The moment they realize that your love does not threaten their freedom but enhances it, that is when the idea of the one stops feeling dangerous and starts feeling possible. And this is only the beginning. And this is only the beginning. Because once an avoidant starts feeling that possibility, that quiet thought of maybe this is different, something deeper begins to unfold inside them. It's subtle at first, almost invisible, but internally they are entering the second stage of the shift. The second requirement is this: you must feel safe, not demanding. Safety to an avoidant is not about you being perfect. It's not about you never expressing needs. It's about emotional steadiness. It's about knowing that if they take a little space, you won't explode. If they're quiet for a few hours, you won't spiral into accusations. If they struggle to articulate feelings, you won't corner them with ultimatums. Most avoidants grew up in environments where emotional needs were either overwhelming or ignored, so they learned to regulate themselves alone. They became hyper-independent, not because they didn't want connection, but because connection felt chaotic. And when chaos equals closeness, distance feels safer. So when you respond to their moments of withdrawal with calm instead of panic, you create a new emotional association in their nervous system. You teach them, without lecturing them, that closeness doesn't have to equal emotional danger. This is the part people get wrong. They think safety means silence. It doesn't. It means regulated communication. It means saying, "I value consistency," without saying, "You're failing me." It means expressing desire without attaching it to pressure. It means being grounded enough in yourself that their temporary distance doesn't destabilize your identity. When they start associating you with nervous system peace, something almost addictive begins to form, because calm connection is rare for them. They are used to either intense passion that burns fast or detached dynamics that never go deep. But with you, if you've stayed steady, they begin to feel something unfamiliar: stability. And stability feels strange to someone who has built their identity around emotional self-sufficiency. At first, they may resist it, they may question it, they may even try to create distance to see if the feeling fades. But if you remain centered, if you don't chase the moment they test the space, they begin to relax into it. And that relaxation is crucial, because the third requirement cannot happen unless the first two are solid. The third requirement is that you do not try to fix them. This one is hard, especially if you're empathetic. Especially if you see their wounds clearly, especially if you understand where their avoidance comes from. It's tempting to think that if you just love them enough, explain enough, heal enough, they'll open fully. But avoidants are highly sensitive to feeling analyzed. Being figured out too quickly can feel invasive. It can feel like exposure without consent, and exposure activates their defense system. When you try to fix them, even with good intentions, they hear, "You're broken." And that touches a quiet shame they already carry. Deep down, many avoidants are aware that they struggle with intimacy. They know they pull away. They know they have walls. And the last thing they need is confirmation that those walls make them defective. But when you accept them, not enabling unhealthy behavior, but accepting who they are in this moment, something powerful happens. The shame softens. And when shame softens, vulnerability becomes possible. There is a profound difference between saying, "You need to change," and saying, "I see you." The first triggers resistance. The second invites trust. When they realize that you're not trying to remodel their personality, not trying to rush their growth, not trying to force them into emotional depths they're not ready for, they start to feel emotionally safe enough to explore those depths on their own. And this leads into the fourth requirement, the most complex one. They must experience emotional safety without losing autonomy. This is the paradox at the center of avoidant attachment. They crave closeness, but they fear engulfment. They want connection, but they fear dependency. So the person they decide is the one is not the person who dissolves into them. It's the person who stands beside them. Autonomy means they can still have their hobbies, their routines, their solitude. It means they can still retreat occasionally without being punished. It means they don't feel monitored or managed. When togetherness does not threaten individuality, commitment begins to feel less like a trap and more like a choice. And choice is everything to an avoidant. They need to feel that staying with you is voluntary, that loving you is something they are stepping into freely, not something they were pushed into through pressure, guilt, or fear of abandonment. Now here's where it gets even more subtle. Once these four conditions begin forming, you stopped chasing, you became steady, you accepted them, and you allowed autonomy. They begin running tests. Not consciously malicious tests, not strategic games, nervous system tests. They might delay responding to see if you react emotionally. They might create small gaps to see if you panic. They might share something slightly vulnerable and observe your reaction carefully. They are assessing one thing: is this safe? If you react with accusation, they retreat. If you react with calm understanding, they lean in slightly more. And this phase can feel confusing because externally they may still seem reserved, but internally they are evaluating you in a much deeper way than you realize. Then something even more important happens. They begin imagining life without you. This is the moment most people never see because it happens quietly in their mind. They picture you not being there. They imagine you moving on. They imagine not having your steady presence. And if that thought creates discomfort, real discomfort, it shakes something loose inside them. Avoidants often don't recognize love through intensity. They recognize it through absence. When the idea of losing you feels heavier than the fear of committing to you, the internal decision starts forming. This is where the internal war begins. Stay guarded, or go all in. The guarded path feels familiar, safe, predictable. It protects them from vulnerability. But it also means risking the loss of someone who feels different. Going all in feels terrifying. It means allowing someone into spaces they've kept locked. It means risking dependence. It means trusting that if they fall, you won't weaponize their vulnerability. This war can last weeks, sometimes months. And during this time, you may feel subtle shifts. They may initiate more. They may open slightly more about their past. They may show protectiveness in small ways. They may check in when you're quiet. These are not random behaviors. They are indicators of internal movement. And then comes the quietest moment of all, the day they choose you but don't announce it. Avoidants often commit internally before they ever verbalize it. One day something clicks. It might be after a calm disagreement where you didn't escalate. It might be after you gave them space without resentment. It might be after they realized your consistency hasn't wavered. They think, I don't want to lose this. Not in a dramatic way, not in a cinematic confession, just a grounded realization. From that point forward, their behavior starts shifting more consistently. They may prioritize you more intentionally. They may include you in future plans without hesitation. They may defend the relationship if someone questions it. They may start softening physically, emotionally, energetically. They won't say, you're the one, immediately. That phrase carries weight, and avoidants don't use heavy words lightly, but they will start acting as if you matter long-term. And this is where many people accidentally ruin it, because once they sense progress, they rush it. They demand verbal confirmation. They push for labels immediately. They test the commitment aggressively. And that pressure can reactivate old fears. When an avoidant is in the final stage of deciding, they are extremely sensitive. They are stepping into vulnerability slowly. If they feel rushed, they retreat. If they feel trusted, they continue forward. This is why patience is not passive in this dynamic. It's powerful. Avoidant love is slow, but when it roots deeply. Once they truly decide you are their person, their loyalty can be intense, not loud, not flashy, but steady. They may not post grand declarations. They may not flood you with dramatic affection, but they will show up. They will stay. They will protect what feels safe. And here's the truth that brings all of this together. You don't make them choose you. You become someone they feel safe choosing. That distinction changes everything. Because when your focus shifts from how do I get them to commit to how do I stay grounded in my own worth, the energy changes. You stop trying to earn love. You start embodying it. And that energy, secure, calm, self-respecting, is magnetic to someone who has spent their life guarding against chaos. So if you are in this journey right now, understand something deeply. Their slowness is not always rejection. Sometimes it's processing. Their distance is not always disinterest. Sometimes it's fear. Their silence is not always indifference. Sometimes it's internal conflict. But none of that means you abandon your standards. None of that means you overextend yourself endlessly. The person who becomes the one to an avoidant is not the person who sacrifices their identity. It's the person who keeps it. Because in the end, what makes them decide is not pressure, it's peace. Not chasing, but choosing. Not intensity, but safety. And when they finally look at you, really look at you, and realize that loving you does not require losing themselves, that is the moment the idea of the one stops being a fantasy and becomes a decision. A quiet decision, a powerful one. And once it's made, it changes everything. And once that quiet, powerful decision is made, the relationship enters a phase that few truly understand. On the outside, avoidance may still appear reserved, calm, or even distant at times, but internally, a transformation has begun. What you are witnessing is not disinterest. It is their careful navigation of trust, autonomy, and emotional integration. They are stepping into a space they've long avoided, slowly dismantling the walls that have protected them for so long. And every subtle choice you make at this stage continues to shape whether they lean further in or retreat back into their comfort zone. The first signal that you've crossed into this new phase is consistency. They begin to prioritize you in ways that are quiet but meaningful. Perhaps they ask about your day more frequently, not out of obligation but genuine curiosity. Maybe they check in during moments of your stress, not to control but to offer subtle support. They may even start sharing small personal thoughts that they previously kept locked away. These are small, almost imperceptible signs, but for someone who has been guarded most of their life, they speak volumes. This is how they test permanence, through actions rather than words. And yet, even as these changes emerge, avoidants are careful. They are still hyper-aware of maintaining their sense of autonomy. They need reassurance not through explicit demands, but through subtle consistency. If you pull back too abruptly, even now, it can trigger a ripple of anxiety. They are learning that closeness does not always equal pressure, but old patterns die slowly. That is why patience at this stage is not passive. It is a profound act of emotional stewardship. Being calm, steady, and reliably present while allowing space creates an environment in which their attachment system can gradually relax. This brings us to one of the most critical and often misunderstood parts of this stage: subtle tests. Avoidants, especially those who have decided internally that you are significant, will naturally run small, often unconscious tests. They might delay responses to gauge your stability. They might share a small vulnerability to see if you respond with understanding. They might retreat emotionally for a brief period just to measure whether your response will feel threatening or stable. None of these tests are manipulative in the way that people often fear. They are a nervous system calibration, a method of ensuring that closeness is safe and sustainable. Your response to these moments, calm, grounded, non-reactive, either strengthens their trust or triggers old defense patterns. During this time, they also begin a mental and emotional rehearsal, imagining life without you. It starts subtly, almost imperceptibly. Perhaps they notice a day when you're absent, or a conversation that reminds them of your uniqueness. They may envision scenarios where you're not present, where your calm consistency is missing, or where the connection you share is gone. And when this visualization triggers a quiet discomfort, an emotional stir they cannot ignore, the gravity of their feelings becomes undeniable. For avoidance, love is often understood in terms of absence or the potential for loss, rather than intensity or verbal declarations. This is the stage where internal conflict peaks. They feel the pull toward emotional closeness, but simultaneously grapple with fear. Fear that they will lose autonomy. Fear that intimacy will expose them. Fear that vulnerability will be met with rejection. They weigh these risks constantly, often without conscious awareness, and in this invisible weighing scale, your presence matters in ways they cannot always articulate. How you handle your own emotions, how you maintain calm, how you honor both their space and your own needs, it all becomes a silent but powerful curriculum. They are learning from you. And here lies the beauty of being the one for an avoidant. The internal tipping point is rarely sudden. It's gradual, cumulative, and profoundly reflective of how you engage with yourself as much as with them. Avoidants decide on love, not because of grand gestures, endless reassurances, or constant pursuit, but because the energy you hold allows them to feel safe enough to choose freely. Their love, once engaged, is quiet yet steadfast. It may not fit societal expectations of romance, but it is deep, resilient, and remarkably loyal. The fourth requirement now comes into full effect. They must experience emotional safety without losing autonomy. This is the paradox at the heart of avoidant attachment. They crave intimacy, yet fear engulfment. They long for partnership, yet guard their independence fiercely. The person they ultimately commit to is not the one who forces closeness or dissolves themselves into the other, but the one who creates a space where they can remain fully themselves while simultaneously leaning in emotionally. Freedom and commitment coexist, but only when trust and consistency have been nurtured over time. To understand this better, consider their perspective. In the past, closeness often came with strings, demands, expectations, or emotional volatility. This created a deep internal association. Intimacy equals risk. But with someone who consistently models calm, grounded love while respecting their autonomy, the equation changes. Closeness no longer equals risk, it becomes a choice. This is a revelation for avoidants because it reframes intimacy as something they can enter without sacrificing identity. The first time they truly feel this, internally they begin to shift. They consider what staying with you would mean, not in terms of loss, but in terms of gain. But even with all these elements in place, external behaviors are subtle. You may not see immediate declarations or dramatic gestures. What you will see is consistency. Small acts of consideration, protective instincts, inclusion in plans, and moments of shared vulnerability. These actions carry more weight than words ever could because they are intentional, chosen, and not reactive. They are the manifestation of an internal decision being enacted quietly. And this leads to another critical stage, the realization of permanence. The avoidant begins to see the relationship as stable and sustainable. They start factoring you into future plans without hesitation, not out of obligation, but because the nervous system has learned that closeness does not equal danger. Their protective instincts relax, the walls they've held for years soften, and once this relaxation occurs, the internal resistance to intimacy diminishes significantly. The decision you have been waiting for is forming, even if unspoken. Yet this is also a fragile stage. If pressured, the avoidant can revert. They can retreat emotionally. They can test boundaries again. This is why it is crucial to maintain the calm, steady energy that has nurtured their trust. Reactivity, ultimatums or demands can undo months of internal work. Their progress depends less on verbal affirmations and more on consistent, grounded presence. Your ability to hold your own emotional space while respecting theirs is the anchor they need to fully commit. The next aspect to understand is the internal war that continues even as they approach the final decision. Avoidants weigh the security of staying with someone they've chosen against the safety of retreating to their familiar independence. Each choice carries a degree of vulnerability. Each moment of leaning in is a risk, and each quiet act of closeness is tested against the fear of losing themselves. But when your energy remains steady, accepting, and consistent, they gradually recognize that the risk of connection is outweighed by the value of staying with you. And then comes the day of subtle revelation. They choose, not with fanfare, not with verbal confirmation, not with dramatic gestures, but with action. They start showing signs that they prioritize you, protect your connection, and consider you as a fundamental part of their life. Their behaviors align with their internal decision. Even if their words lag behind, they don't announce it, because for them, commitment is lived quietly first. It is enacted in habits, choices, and subtle attention, not in declarations. At this point, you have crossed the threshold from being someone they enjoy to someone they actively choose. This shift is profound because it represents a recalibration of their internal attachment patterns. They are no longer in a reactive mode, responding out of fear or avoidance. They are in a reflective mode, choosing connection intentionally and consistently. This is the essence of avoidant love, slow, deliberate, and deep-rooted once fully engaged. And yet even now their journey is ongoing. The avoidant will continue to navigate internal fears, past conditioning, and the delicate balance between autonomy and intimacy. Your role in this stage is not to fix or chase, but to maintain the steady, grounded energy that first invited them in. Your presence serves as a model for secure connection. Your calm consistency reassures them that closeness does not equal loss and that love does not require abandoning oneself. This is the invisible foundation of being the one for someone who has avoided love for much of their life. It is not about words, promises, or strategies. It is about presence. It is about energy. It is about creating a space where vulnerability feels safe, autonomy is respected, and trust can grow quietly yet profoundly. And once they arrive at this internal choice, the depth of their commitment is unlike anything you may have seen in someone who has never faced the struggle of avoidance. So understand this. Their love will never be loud, but it will be unshakable. Their devotion will manifest not in dramatic confessions, but in consistent actions. Their protection of the relationship will be subtle but fierce, and their choice of you, once made, will endure because it is grounded in safety, freedom, and the quiet certainty that they are fully seen, accepted, and understood without compromise. The journey to this point is slow, sometimes frustrating, and often misunderstood, but the moment they decide you are the one, it is transformative, not just for them, but for the relationship itself. It is the point where avoidance yields to choice, distance yields to presence, and fear yields to trust. And if you maintain your calm, grounded, and accepting energy, this quiet, profound, and enduring connection becomes a reality that neither time nor circumstance can easily undo. This is when the avoidant decides, not in a rush, not in fanfare, not in words alone, but in quiet, intentional, and deeply felt action. And that is the kind of love that is rare, resilient, and real. And as this quiet, intentional love unfolds, the relationship enters its most delicate and profound phase. By now, the avoidant has begun to internalize the realization that they do not need to sacrifice themselves to love you. They are starting to understand that intimacy is not a threat, but a choice they can make safely. This understanding does not appear overnight. It has been cultivated over weeks, months, or even years of patient, steady interaction. Every calm response, every respectful boundary, every moment where you refuse to chase them or react in fear has built the foundation for this realization. The signs of this phase are subtle but unmistakable. Once you know what to look for, you may notice them including you in their life in ways they never have before. Invitations to events, the sharing of personal routines, discussions about long-term plans, all of these are indicators that they are consciously integrating you into their world. What makes these actions significant is not their scale or drama, but the intentionality behind them. Every choice signals a growing trust, a quiet test that you have passed repeatedly. But even as they lean in, they are still navigating an internal balancing act. Avoidants are wired to protect their autonomy, and even the slightest hint of pressure can reactivate old fears. You might wonder why someone who seems so committed still pulls back occasionally or hesitates in certain moments. Understand that this is not indecision or lack of interest. It is the nervous system recalibrating. They are learning that closeness does not require surrender, and that trust can coexist with independence. Every step they take toward you is measured, intentional, and profoundly meaningful. And during this time, the internal tests continue. These tests are subtle but powerful. They may experiment with small withdrawals to see how you respond. They may share vulnerable thoughts to gauge whether you can handle their truth without judgment. They may question certain decisions or boundaries, observing your reactions quietly. These behaviors are not manipulative. They are the avoidance way of assessing the stability of the emotional environment. How you respond to these moments determines whether they feel safe to lean in further or compelled to retreat. Calm, grounded, and non-reactive responses continue to be the most magnetic. In tandem with these internal evaluations, they also begin to imagine life without you more concretely. At first, this imagining is fleeting, a thought here, a scenario there. But over time, it becomes a kind of mental rehearsal. They picture days when you are not present, moments when your calm consistency is missing, and scenarios in which the life they are beginning to build with you no longer exists. And when these imaginings provoke discomfort, a quiet urgency arises within them. The very idea of losing you begins to outweigh the fears they have long associated with intimacy. It is in this tension that love begins to solidify. And then comes the internal reckoning: stay guarded or go all in. Avoidants live in a paradox between the comfort of distance and the desire for connection. Each moment of leaning in is weighed against the safety of retreat. Each display of vulnerability is measured against the risk of being overwhelmed or hurt. Yet, with your steady presence, they gradually tip the scales. They begin to realize that choosing you does not threaten their independence. It does not force them into a space they cannot control. It is, instead, a deliberate, conscious choice they are capable of making without sacrificing themselves. This is when the internal war starts to resolve, and they begin showing the first tangible signs of real commitment. They prioritize you in ways that are quiet but profound. Perhaps they remember small details about your preferences, anticipate your needs without being asked, or check in consistently without overcompensation. They may begin defending the relationship in subtle ways, demonstrating loyalty without fanfare. These behaviors indicate that they are no longer just emotionally exploring, they are actively choosing a future with you. And yet, at this stage, it is crucial to understand the fragility of the dynamic. Avoidants can and will retreat if they sense pressure, judgment, or sudden demands for labels and declarations. The final stages of their internal decision require freedom to continue processing without fear of reprisal. They need to feel that the choice to be close remains voluntary, not coerced. How you navigate this period, remaining consistent, grounded, and emotionally available while allowing autonomy, is what ensures that their internal decision translates into lasting commitment. The beauty of being the one for an avoidant lies precisely in this balance. You do not need to manipulate or chase. You do not need to reassure constantly. You do not need to solve or fix. You need to be steady, present, and secure in your own emotional state. This energy communicates to them more clearly than words ever could. Closeness is safe, love is reliable, and connection does not threaten freedom. When they internalize this, the decision to commit becomes irreversible, even if expressed in quiet, understated ways. And now comes one of the most transformative realizations in this process. They begin to imagine a future with you not as a burden, but as a choice that enriches their life. Your presence becomes integrated into their mental and emotional landscape. They see you as a companion, a confidant, and a stabilizing presence. They picture shared experiences, consistent connection, and moments of emotional safety they have longed for but never dared to trust. And in this imagination, fear begins to yield to desire. Hesitation gives way to intentionality, and love transitions from a guarded possibility to a chosen reality. At this point, their internal decision solidifies through subtle action. They begin making choices that reflect long-term commitment. They include you in plans without prompting. They check in consistently. They take protective stances in ways that demonstrate attachment without dependency. These actions are deliberate. They are manifestations of the quiet internal yes they have been processing for months. Unlike the anxious or impulsive declarations you may have seen elsewhere, this love is slow, deliberate, and enduring. It is the kind of love that forms a foundation strong enough to weather challenges because it is rooted in choice, trust, and security. And still, even now, patience remains vital. Avoidants are acutely sensitive to shifts in energy. They can revert to old defensive patterns if they sense unpredictability, pressure, or emotional volatility. Maintaining calm, steady, and grounded energy continues to be the most powerful magnet at this stage. Every moment of emotional consistency reinforces their internal decision, while every reactive or anxious response introduces doubt. This is why the journey to their commitment is both delicate and profoundly instructive. It is not about persuasion, but about energy alignment. Finally, the culmination of this phase is a quiet, powerful love, the avoidant. Having navigated internal fears, past conditioning, and the tension between autonomy and intimacy, reaches a point where their choice is clear. You are no longer just someone they enjoy being with. You are the person they choose freely, consistently, and deeply. This is the essence of avoidant love. It is slow to arrive, but once fully present, it is resilient, deliberate, and profoundly loyal. They may not verbalize it in grand statements, but their actions, consistency, and protective instincts make it unmistakably clear. In this stage, the relationship transcends the superficial dynamics that may have existed at the beginning. It is no longer about testing boundaries, pushing for control, or responding reactively. It becomes about coexisting as autonomous individuals who choose each other repeatedly, consciously, and with respect for both personal freedom and shared connection. This balance is the hallmark of avoidant love realized, the quiet, enduring, and deeply rooted choice that forms the foundation of a lasting bond. And so, once they have reached this phase, their internal decision manifests not as dramatic gestures, but as lived experience. They show up, they invest, they lean in emotionally, they protect what is precious, they prioritize you in subtle, intentional ways, and the realization that they have chosen you does not depend on grand declarations. It depends on sustained, consistent, and deliberate action that aligns with their internal commitment. This is the pinnacle of when an avoidant decides you are the one. It is not loud, it is not immediate, it is not transactional. It is quiet, cumulative, and profoundly transformative. And when it happens, the love that emerges is unlike any other, slow, steady, and unshakably loyal, born out of fear overcome, trust established, and freedom preserved.